Guys, welcome back to Keeping It Apostolic, the most edifying podcast in the world. I'm joined here today with Abuna Paul Girguis. Thank you, Abuna, for coming onto the podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here with you.
So before we get started, we'd like to get to know who you are a little bit more. So tell us more about yourself, who you are, your story, all that.
So, my name is Father Paul Girguis. I serve here at St. Mark in Washington, D.C. I was ordained in 2009. Before that, I was actually serving as a missionary. We had moved to Kenya. We had gone one way. We were planning on living in Kenya. And by God's intervention, he orchestrated that I would be here, priest in D.C. Before that, I grew up in California. I lived in the LA Diocese, grew up in the LA Diocese. That's pretty much it.
Nice. So again, thank you for coming onto the podcast. And today we're going to talk about modern day saints and about just sainthood in general. So my first question for you is, you've been a priest now for
15
and a half years, pretty long time. Of course, a lot of us, we hear of the big saints of our church, even the modern day saints, the big ones. But I would like to ask you a little bit about the hidden saints from within the church. What is your experience, becoming a priest and kind of noticing these people that you would have never noticed before? And what effect did that have on your spirituality?
So it really takes, as you go through this journey of encountering just saint-like people, modern-day saints, or people that are not even known, you start to find similar qualities among all of them, or you see just this childlike purity. And the childlike purity, actually, I had the blessing of speaking to a modern-day saint. His name is Abuna Antoni. I had a unique relationship or experience with him. I remember asking him, what is it that makes people like anchorites or the Sawah fathers? And he said they have to have the heart of a child. And as I encounter holy people, I see that they have that pure, innocent, childlike spirit. And so usually that's the common theme. Often when you visit sometimes the elderly, or you find the very, very poor, and I mean the poorest of the poor, they have a simple faith and they encounter Christ in a very simple way, where they're not super cerebral in their interacting with him. It's very I'm just a child and I'm going to deal with you like a child, and God deals with them in miraculous ways because they interact with God as a child.
Yeah, and I really like the point that you made about what Abuna Antoni is. We'll talk a little bit more about him in a second, of just having the heart of a child. And I think a lot of times we get so caught up in just the hustle and bustle and whatever of this world that we forget that Christ calls us to be like little children to him. So moving in that subject, we'll talk a little bit about, as you brought him up, Abuna Antoni, and what was your experiences with him? Give us, a couple stories and just where you saw really the heart of a child in him. I was visiting him in Egypt. We were on a mission trip to serve the poorest of the poor in Upper Egypt. And we went to the church that he was serving as a pastor in. He was had a residence where he was living in this church in Alminia. And he was serving congregation. And one of the experiences that I have is that he was one time we were sitting with him. He's like, "You guys want to see St. Mary?" And we know that he's very, very close to St. Mary. So we said, of course. And so he takes us up to his room. He has this beautiful picture of full-size picture of St. Mary. And he said, "Do you see how beautiful she is?" And he's looking at her. He's like, "She's so beautiful." And he kept on giving us this example. He said, we said, "Well, how did you get to know St. Mary?" And he said, "When I was young, I used to always walk around and say, أنا بحب واحدة اسمها مريم. I love this woman whose name is Miriam." As a young child, one time when he was a priest, he was said that same statement. There was a young girl that was sitting there. Her name was Miriam, and she kind of blushed. And he's like, "Not you." He was saying that he's speaking about his love, or the person that he loves so much, as a mother and as a dear companion to him, and that was Saint Mary. So he takes us to his room, and he's like, "Okay, speak to her." So everybody's standing, we're praying in his cell,
and everybody's praying, and we're singing praises to her, and he's like, do you see? And I'm like, see what? He's like, Abuna, look well. I'm looking at the picture. I'm like, Abuna, maybe it's my sins. I can't see anything. He's like, Abuna, look. And I'm looking, and I'm like, I don't know. Is there something I'm not seeing? So he's like, okay, continue praying. So we're all praying. And we start singing and doing glorifications. And then he said, do you see? I said, no, Abuna. He said, does anyone have a camera? It was 2010. So he said, it was back in the days when we used to carry these like little digital cameras with a little screen in the back. He's like, take a picture of her. So we took a picture of the picture. And he says, let me see. And he looks in the screen. And he says, just like that. And we look in the screen. And in the picture of the picture, light is coming out of this photo. Like a shining light where you really can't see. It's just all bright light. And he looks at it, he's like, hey, okay, that's how it is. And it's just like child, right? He's like, that's how you're supposed to see St. Mary. And we were like, okay, maybe it's our lack of faith, our lack of simplicity, maybe our sinfulness. Who knows? But in that, it was he's like, do you want to see St. Mary? Like a young child who's going to take us on a journey.
I really like that, because I think, it really shows us what simplicity really looks like. Because like you said, like think about the fact that it took a camera to show like what that really was. It's as if our own nature, our own lens that we put on blinds us from, just the work of God in us. I was told to ask you about stories of Saweh. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you if you have any stories about Saweh and your experiences and encounters with anchorites.
So I will tell you, not necessarily like my personal experiences of one of them is with Abuna Angelus himself. I had developed a relationship with Abuna Angelus, and when my wife Sherry was in the hospital and she was getting to a point where the doctor said like, we don't know what to do. All of her organs were starting to fail. She was on dialysis. They were like, it's not working. We don't know what to do. And they basically said like, they would come into the room, the hospital room every day, and like say like, we're doing our best. And Sherry would be like, don't let me die. And they're like, we're trying. So something said, call Abuna Angelus. So I called a dear friend who knows Abuna, and he had somebody that was in Abuna's village, went to Abuna Angelus, called me, and I said, Abuna, I need you. I told him the story about Sherry, and I said, Abuna, please have St. Mary get involved. And he said, okay. I said, Abuna, like now. Like she doesn't have any time. He said, where are you? I said, I'm in Washington, D.C. And he said, how far is the flight? Well, 8 years before that, when we had visited Abuna Angelus in Egypt, he was like, where are you guys coming from? So we said, we're coming from Washington, D.C. He said, how long did it take you? We said, like 12 hours. He said, 12 hours. And he just like looked up. And I said, Abuna, how long is it supposed to take? He's like, I take it in 2 minutes. I was like, have you been to America? And he said one time St. Mary took me to go to pray for someone. So that was like my first kind of like realization that, okay, he doesn't fly like the rest of us, right? He doesn't pay the same airplane ticket that we all have to pay. And then, so this was when 2018, when I was speaking to Abuna Angelus when Sherry was in the hospital. He's reminding me of our conversation almost of what took place in 2010. He said, how long does it take? So then I said, 12 hours. I said, Abuna, can you come and pray for her? And he said, Inshallah. And then he asked me how long it takes. I said, 12 hours. He said, okay. Where are you? Washington, D.C. All right, Abuna, bye. Next morning, so at night, I would Sherry would be in the hospital bed. I would play like hymns and liturgies and whatever. Well, that night, I had played on my phone for a little bit. I took the phone because I had the kids at home. I would go stay with the kids at night while Sherry was in the hospital. And she said, I love the liturgy that you played for me last night. And I said, I didn't play liturgy for you. And she said, yeah. She said, I could hear the Shoria, and it was like, I felt like I was in liturgy. And I said, Sherry, I left. I had to leave early because I had to take care of the kids. She said, really? I could have swore I heard like sensors and I said, I don't know. And then I looked on the doors of the hospital room, and there were two oil crosses on the doors of the hospital. So when you walk into the hospital room, there's that door. It's closed. There's an oil cross on that. And then on the bathroom door, usually hospital rooms, there's a bathroom door. So there's another door, and there was an oil cross on that. And I asked one of the priests that was with me, I said, Abuna, because they were visiting my wife regularly. I said, Abuna, did you come? Did you anoint the doors? I said, Abuna, your wife is like suffering on the bed. I'm going to anoint your doors? Doesn't make sense. I didn't know what it was. I assumed it was Abuna Angelos, because by the grace of God, everything started to turn around miraculously. Within like 24 hours, we had a medicine that reversed everything, and it saved Sherry. And then rewind 3 years before that, in 2015, I was also with Abuna Angelos. And I was trying to, usually if you press Abuna Angelos enough to tell you stories or to get stuff out of him, so I was trying to press him a little bit. So I said, Abuna, are there a lot of anchorites in the Coptic Church? He said, well, you guys have one in America. And I said, really? He said, Ayu, he's a great saint. And then I whispered in his ear, somebody, and he said, Ayu. He said, Da Qadis Hazim, he's an amazing saint. So then, okay, I that was just in my head. 2018 does the miracle for Sherry. 2021. People are visiting us here in Virginia, and they're friends with the name that I had mentioned to Abuna Angelos. And they were on the phone with him, and I said, please ask him to pray for Abuna Paul and Sherry. And the person that was with me said, Fulen, please, I'm with a priest. He's from here in Washington, D.C. His name is Abuna Paul, and his wife is Sherry. They're asking for your prayers. He says, oh, I know them. He said, oh, you know them? My friend said, you know them? And he said, yeah. I took their blessing with Abuna Angelos. The guy that's having this conversation on the phone with him doesn't understand what that means. We kind of just met him. So then I meet this person, this recommended anchorite, father by Abuna Angelos. I met him and I had a conversation with him. And when he saw Sherry, he's like, oh my gosh, you're so beautiful. I'm so happy to see you like this. You look so much better. So Sherry's sitting and she's like, I've never seen him before. Sherry's never seen this person before. And so he kind of kind of realized that, okay, we're figuring. And I said, I said, did you pray for Sherry? He said, I was so worried about Sherry. But the people that comforted me about Sherry, and he said, were St. Mary and St. George and Pope Carolus and Abuna Angelos. And I said, there wasn't a fifth? And he looked at me. And he just basically end the subject, right? I believe that this person was also there and took place in the miracle with Sherry, with Abuna Angelos, that when he healed Sherry. There's other experiences that I have that I don't know if it was necessarily him and Anchorite, but the late Amba Cross, the thrice blessed Amba Cross of St. Anthony's Monastery in California, was a very, very holy man. And I myself had many experiences that he had clairvoyance, and he knew so many things. He knew things about the monastery. I remember I was a young boy, and I would stay there for weeks at a time. And I told Amba Cross, I said, I don't want to go to Vespers today. I want to just do my own prayer with my friend. We want to go and do Temgit to St. Anthony and pray, whatever. And Amba Cross was so playful and childlike. But he said, but be very serious. I looked at him and said, okay, we'll go. So we went, young boys, 10, 11 years old. We go, we do glorification praises. And at that time, maybe because we were so innocent and young, God had given us a very, very heavenly experience. We began to smell incense. And then we were singing with 10-year-old squeaky voices, Jinainan, have mercy, that we say in the liturgy. And as we finished the first three, we heard in the background of the mountains eleisonimes, which is like the response that we would say in Greek to the Coptic. When the priest says it in Coptic, the congregation would respond in Greek. We heard it in the background of the mountains, like a choir of angels. And we were like so excited, whatever. We ran back, and Amba Cross is like, Embasattu. We're like, Sayyidina, Sayyidina. And he's like, shh, I know everything that happens at my monastery. He said, keep it in your heart. He said, keep it, Yani, in your heart. That's a special experience that it's as if he knew, and he knew what was happening. And Amba Cross, one time, we were sitting in a house. He was getting treatment at one point. If he would stay in a house, and out of nowhere, Amba Cross was like, he's like, do you smell that? And I said, yeah. What does it smell? It smells like that black soot that you smell in like a chimney. And I'm like, yeah, what is that? He's like, that's the smell of the devil. Of course, I'm a young boy, freak out. I'm like, what does that mean? He's like, go get me a cup of water. I'm like, I'm not leaving you. I'm gonna sit right next to you. If you want a cup of water, I'll walk with you to go. I'm not going over there by myself, because apparently the devil is around us. And all of a sudden, Amba Cross went, and we got water, and he prayed over the water, and the smell disappeared like instantly from his prayers. Very, very, very holy man. That was, one of my experiences with Amba Cross. Some of my experiences with Amba Cross. He was my spiritual father at one point in my life. And I remember as a young youth, my heart was very heavy. I was going through so many challenges. I was really struggling with like either walking with Christ or just walking with the world. And I had this battle within myself. And I was getting sucked into like my, like the high school world and environment, whatever. And I remember, so I went to confession. We sat down and we said a prayer, did the sign of the cross. And then he began to just speak to me about specific sins in scenarios that were exactly like the sins that I was committing. And it was as if he knew, and he left, and he spoke about every single sin that I was going to confess. And he could sense that my heart was heavy. And then after he listed everything, and he kept on saying, oh, and he's talking more about another sin. Oh, and he would keep on going until he finished. He said, is there anything else? He said, no, Satan. He said everything. and he wanted to ease my way into being ready to just get these things off my chest. And he said, these sins are the sins that the Lord is going to forgive you. He's going to wash you, and you're going to start fresh, and you're going to be new with Christ. And he was almost in his clairvoyance telling me every sin that I was going to confess. I had the same experience with Father Lazarus in the mountain of St. Anthony. May God protect his life and guard him. I had an experience with him. Maybe he shares many experiences, so I'm not shy to be able to share this story. But when I was living in Kenya, he was in Tanzania, and so we would go and spend periods of time with him. And so we're living with him, and one time I remember when he was first there, we were a church youth group, and there was a big group from DC, and I was from LA at the time. And we had all these plans of how we were going to go out and serve in these churches or whatever. And Abuna Lazarus is like, no, we have to pray the whole Akbaya, and then we'll serve. Like, Abuna, we have a whole program. And he said, no one's going to do that. And we felt like we were like in prison. Abuna prayed Ashaya for us. We did Ashaya. And then he says, if anybody wants to confess, I'll be in this altar. You can come and confess. So one guy goes in, comes out like after an hour and a half. He's like, that was the most amazing experience in the world. All of us, at this point, nobody knew that Abuna Lazarus was Abuna Lazarus. He was like himself in his blessedness. We're like, you're stupid. You don't know anything. Abuna Lazarus is annoying, and he's like keeping us in lockdown. So they said, okay, send Mikey in. That was me before I was ordained. Send Mikey in. So I go and I confess. I'm just like testing the waters, and I'm like, I do this and this and this. And we're sitting in this chapel. There's no electricity, by candlelight. He's looking into the candle, and he's in deep prayer as I'm confessing, and he's speaking. And he's not my father confession. I'm just quick confession, kind of like while we're on the mission. And then I stopped, and he said, why don't you want to mention this? And then
he mentioned at that point I felt like I'm sitting in my underwear, like he's like seeing right through me, okay, and at that time I just like I broke down, and he started to go deep into my struggle and how it got there, and like, and I remember that, and then he had prophesied. Sherry, my wife, was on that missionary trip, and he gave me the despericon of the Lomat al Baraka, and he gave it to me, and sorry, he gave it to Sherry, and he said, "This is for you." He said, "You're gonna make." I mean, Sherry and I, we were interested in each other, and we were getting to know each other, and he said, "This is, you're gonna marry Mikey, and he's gonna become a priest." This was in the year 2000. I was ordained in 2009, right? He had prophesied. He had prophesied that. Another cool experience of Abuna Lazarus. We get to the mission, and he is there with one of the Tanzanian ladies who's like kind of cleaning the house and preparing it. And I walk in the door, and he's like speaking rapidly in Swahili. And my eyes open. I'm like, Abuna, you speak Swahili? He looks at me. He's like, no. He walks off. In Tanzania, it's not like Kenya. Kenya, many people learn in English. Nobody in Tanzania knows English. So he clearly was speaking in Swahili, because nobody in the whole village, we're in a very, very poor village, knows English at all. We have the hardest time finding translators. And so Abuna here is instructing her in Swahili. He looks at me, he's like, no. And he walks off. He was speaking in Swahili. God had given him almost a tongue to be able to speak to them. It was beautiful. Those are some lights.
Those are great. You have me honestly speechless, because I think a lot of times, especially as youth, like we want to see like grand miracles, like things like that. Like a lot of times, like we feel like our faith will be strengthened by seeing those miracles, when in reality, your faith has to be already strong to see those miracles. And I think it takes an eye for those. So kind of moving the conversation in that direction, how can we see the miracles in our day-to-day lives?
You kind of nailed it on the head. I think it's the person seeking Christ and approaching him with a sincere, honest faith in giving yourself to him. Then you open up yourself to the kingdom of Christ, right? Once you enter into his realm, versus trying to always bring Jesus down into your realm, right? Okay, Lord, I want to pass my test, make sure that, like I can get to my appointment without traffic. These little things that we pray, okay, they happen, and we don't, it's not a big deal to us. That when we begin to interact with the heavenly and realize that the church is one, we don't have a victorious church and a struggling church. We have the church that consists of the victorious and the struggling. It's not two separate churches. We're all one church, one body. And the more that we approach Christ in that faith, then once you enter into that realm, then that's when your eyes start to open. But how do we see these miracles? I believe here in the West, our minds are very complex. And we need answers for everything, and how and why. And there's some people with the simplicity of believing the beauty within our church and taking it as it is. And the church says we should pray in this way, and I pray in this way. And the church says that we interact with the saints, and we're like, well, what do you mean? Can the saints hear our prayers? Well, are they like Christ? And the simple interact with the heavenly in a way. There's no barrier. There's nothing separating us from them. But the mind that is tied always to the metaphysical and what I could feel or touch or grasp with my mind, it's going to be very, very hard to do that, because Christ deals with those in a very, very simple way. I'll give you an example. There was a time, one time we were one of our missionary trips to Egypt, and there was a person that was kind of helping us with our errands and driving us around and taking us to places as we're preparing for the mission. And I didn't want to burden this person too much, so I said, I'm waiting for her to fill up gas so I can pay for the gas. She's driving us around doing all these things. I want to pay for the gas, and I'm waiting. And we're there for
2 weeks, she's going and coming and whatever, and I'm like, Ya binti, when does your car run out of gas? She said, Abuna, please, don't jinx it. Just leave it the way it is. It's as if her stuff never runs out. Even when it came to like even personal belongings that, your soap and your things that run out, she's like, God doesn't allow these things to run out. Why? She deals with God this simple way. Lord, I don't have money. For you're going to take care of these things. And so she puts in gas and the gas never runs out. Or the soap never runs dry. And so that simplicity in knowing that the Lord is here. And the Lord is seeking me more than I'm seeking him. I think so many of us were searching for him in like desperation. I'm like begging for God. And God's like begging for you. I'm the one knocking on the door. You're the one that has to answer. The Bible says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Christ is there waiting. And where Christ is his full of his glory. So how do we experience these miracles? Don't be so complex in your thinking. Don't need proof for everything. Don't need proof for everything. How does this work and how does that work? Trust that this is the church that Christ has established and what the church has passed down and what you see across every generation and every church and of every language living for 2,000 years. Trust it and take it with simplicity. That if they say we fast for St. Mary, well, why do we fast for St. Mary? And don't we fast for Jesus? Yeah, we fast for Jesus. But St. Mary is there, and we are offering this special fast to Christ, asking for the intercessions of St. Mary in this time in which the early church was fasting at this time, in the time when they were preparing or celebrating this season of her Assumption. We take it and we say, okay, if the church does it, we do it. There's power in it. If you reject that power, then you're going to find yourself powerless. You have no way to access the heaven because your mind isn't able to access it. We access it with the heart.
How do you think we can obtain this simple thinking? Because I think it's very hard for us to, like, it's easy for us to say, like, be simple. What does that really look like in our day-to-day lives?
Pursue, like go find the simple and put yourself around them. I remember early in my priesthood, when I was doing visitations, we had a family that had immigrated from Upper Egypt. They were very, very, very poor, and I went and visited them, their home. They were renting out a basement, and in the basement there was 2 bedrooms and a little just like common sitting area, and I saw all like one room was really, really packed with like mattresses and suitcases and clothes, and I'm thinking, well, why are you guys all sitting in here? And we sat on the floor, and they wanted to feed me. We all ate with our hands, like we got a common bowl, and we put the food. And in the beginning, I was thinking like, okay, this is a little bit gross, okay? And then I started to say, you know what? Who cares? I jumped in, and as I started to encounter them, and I started to see that, I said, why are you guys all squeezed in one room? They said, because that's the church. In their 2-bedroom basement that they're renting, they're a family of 4. They have 1 room for a church, and the whole family sleeps in 1 room, the smaller room, and the bigger room is the church. And I could not imagine why they would do that. When we encounter and surround ourselves with the simple and the pure, you'll learn how to deal with Christ the way they deal with Christ. If you want to be around the super intelligent and intellectual, you're going to get the intellectual. If you want the pure in faith, go and observe them and watch how they speak to one another and how do they live. To be honest with you, today I went to go give communion to an elderly woman in a rehab center, and she's a beautiful old lady. She's 94. She has pretty blue eyes and white hair, okay? And she's been moved around from hospital to rehab center, and everywhere she goes, they say, oh, you're the queen, because she looks like Queen Elizabeth from England. You're the queen. And every place that she moved, they would say, you're the queen. And she said, Abuna, I hate it when they do that. I hate it when they do that. I felt like there was a demonic spirit trying to fight with me and give me pride. So I rejected every time. And I said, why do they keep on calling me the queen? And I rejected them. And I told them, I'm God's child. I'm God's servant. Don't say that. Of course, they're just trying to be sweet to this old lady. They're nurses. She wouldn't allow them to call her the queen. You know, when you see a simple old lady and she's in the hospital and you want to like, kind of like encourage her and tell her some nice words. She wouldn't accept it. She said, lest a demonic spirit fight against me to make me think that I'm better than I am. The pure, the simple, the small is where Christ is. Christ is not in the world. Okay? Like what I mean by do not love the world nor the things which are in the world. He's not there. He chooses to not be found in those things.
It reminds me of like the weakness of man is the strength of God. And that when we try to do things out of our own strength, or we try to do things out of our own intellect or intelligence, and not purely from the hands of God, like we miss out on so much. Like it's the thing to me that really proves this the most is that the amount of biblical scholars that are atheist. Like there are people who spend their entire lives, all they do is study the Bible. All they spend their entire life in the scripture, and they're atheist. And you think like that makes no sense. Like there's no like
they're treating it like it's a science. Exactly,
because there's no simplicity. It's I need a proof for every single thing that's written in here. Everything needs to be cross-referenced. Everything needs to, this, and it's like there's a whole spirit behind it. And I was talking to one of my friends earlier this week, and we were talking about like how orthodoxy is like tends to be very centered in terms of faith. And a lot of people think that orthodoxy is a very like strict thing. I think it's very like rigid, very rule, and it's really not. And he said something that was really nice. He was like, orthodoxy is about the spirit of the law and not the letter of the law. And it just really stuck out to me because like in this conversation as well, like it's not about what these people do. It's not about what they know. It's not about the theology or the patristics or the whatever. It's about what is the spirit of God that they have inside of them. And so I think a lot of times we, especially in today's world in America, in the modern day, we do a very good job because of the ideological persecution. We do a very good job of all the intellectual stuff, all the theology, patristics, church father sayings, all that. But we miss out on living what we know.
100%. There are so many living gospels in which you can see all of the theological truths in those simple, pure, self-emptying people who are pouring themselves out. You can look at a mother who is laboring for her children and never like tires of feeding and caring for and nursing and changing and waking up in the middle of the night. And you look and you say, how do you do this? And you say, I see the grace of the Holy Spirit bringing the likeness of Christ in this mother. You see it. So the Orthodox Church, we shouldn't look at it as like you said, a bunch of rules and strictness. The Orthodox Church is freedom. It really is freedom. I remember I met a hermit during my 40 days, and I built a deep connection with him. So I stayed in touch with him after my 40 days of priesthood. And then there was kind of some things going on in the church, people that were kind of overcomplicating asceticism and the spiritual rule. And our church was struggling from that time. I remember calling this hermit. He's a hermit, right? He's living in the desert. There's no more ascetic than that.
Yeah.
And I said, Abuna, tell me about your spiritual rule. I said, what do you mean? And I said, your canon. Like, what do you do, and how does it work? And he said, Abuna, he said, when we're little, we teach a kid to brush his teeth in the morning and the evening. In the morning and the evening. Every day you tell him, morning and evening. Until eventually, this child matures enough to say, I want to brush my teeth because I want my mouth clean. I want my teeth clean. Not because I'm supposed to do it in the morning and in the evening. He said, then at every time, after any meal, you want to brush your teeth because you want cleanliness. You're not tied to morning and evening at this point. It's after a meal. I could brush my teeth. And so he said, I could spend on one psalm 3 days, walking with the Lord in the desert, living with him in this psalm. And I'm not praying all of the psalms. I'm on one psalm for 3 days, walking in the desert. Freedom in Christ. So there is a training, right? A training in order that you would learn how to be free. So the strictness is in the immaturity of a believer. We're training them morning and evening and morning and evening, and do it like this until you can be free and understand the spirit of the law that you're talking about.
How are ways that we can, as people, how can we see those hidden saints? How can we, like, obviously as a priest you get the opportunity to, you have to visit these people, so you get the opportunity to directly deal with them, but there's a power in us seeing that as well. How can we as ordinary people just see the grace of God in other people, not necessarily in life, but in other people?
I'm telling you, it's Christ said it very clear. He says, whatsoever you do to the least of my brethren, that you do unto me. And then he said, I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and I was hungry and you fed me. That in finding those that are weak and suffering and vulnerable, you will encounter Christ and his miracles. As long as you play it safe in Christianity, I go to church, I do my thing, serve some Sunday school, I do what I'm supposed to do, the play it safe Christianity, you'll never encounter Christ. Christ isn't in the box. I really believe he's outside of the box. Go where there are people in need. When you visit the lost, you'll experience the miracles and power of Christ, because now you've entered into his world, because those lost are his. And so now he needs to give you power and give you words and give you experiences in order for these people to be drawn to Christ. When you visit the sick, when you serve the poor, and when I mean the poor, even the poorest of the poor. When we would be in Egypt visiting literally people who don't have enough to eat every day. There was one beautiful lady. Her name was Nagafa. Nagafa means chandelier. and we went, and she was an old lady, she was living in her room by herself. And she had a mud floor. And she was so pure, but she was suffering from pain, and her room was cold in the winters, like stones, right? They don't have blankets. Something made me ask her. I said, "Yeah, Mama, tell me, who are the saints that you've seen or experienced?" I don't know what made me ask her that question. But she looks at me and she's like, "Abuna Krolos." So she has a picture of Pope Krolos on her wall. So I'm like, "Mean Abuna Krolos?" She's like, "Abuna Krolos," and she points at Pope Krolos' picture. And I said, "Tell me." So she said, "One time I had a recorder and I used to play like a tape recorder, and I used to play a liturgy, and I loved the liturgy, and that was the one thing that would give me comfort. And I felt like I could forget my pain in the presence of the liturgy on the tape. And one day the recorder broke. So I went to the deacon of the church. I said, "Could you fix it?" He couldn't fix it. I went to the priest of the church. "Could you fix it?" He couldn't fix it. So then I said, "Ya Buna Krolos." I don't know why she was calling me Buna Krolos. "Ya Buna Krolos." She said, "Do something. I was enjoying the liturgy, and I'm enjoying heaven, and I'm enjoying the saints, and then you're going to allow it to be broken like this?" She held the recorder to the picture of Pope Krolos, and Pope Krolos came out of the picture and fixed the recorder. The priest that was taking me on the visitations, he says, "I'll tell you the rest of the story after." So we say a prayer. She prays this most beautiful, heartfelt, pure prayer. And then I said, "Hey, Abuna, what's the rest of the story?" He said, "I came to visit her one time. The tape recorder is not plugged into the wall, and there's no batteries. It's just playing the tape by itself." And it's just this simplicity and this purity of those that have no one else but God. We have no one but you. Those are the people that you go visit. People who have no one but Jesus, those in prison, you'll encounter Christ. People that have no one to provide for them except for Christ, those are the people that you'll encounter, these saints and these beautiful people.
It reminds me of, you're not going to remember this, but when I was here in May, we came to a Bible study here at St. Mark's, and there were two things you said. You were given the Bible, so two things you said that really stuck out to me. One of them was like this really deep question of, have you really encountered Christ? And I remember sitting there and just listening to, like what it means to really encounter Christ. And you're talking about Bios and Zoe and different types of life and all that. And it really struck me that like I had never really experienced who Christ is. Or if I have, I was never perceptive to it. Like I knew who Christ was, but I didn't know who Christ was. And so my question for you is, how can we encounter Christ? How can we, like, as youth especially, we look for these supernatural miracles, we look for these huge things as our encounters for Christ, and we leave empty-handed because the chance you see an apparition of a saint is, very limited, of course. How can we encounter Christ and really, like, know who he is?
First, I think we can encounter him on many levels. First, in order to be able to identify him, you need to reflect on Christ in the scriptures, and specifically in the Gospels. One time in visiting Abuna Lazarus in the mountain of St. Anthony in Egypt, he said, sometimes, to be honest with you, I want to tell you, just read the words in red. Don't worry about the words in black. Just follow the words of Christ. Understand his character, how he views sinners, how he deals with the simple-hearted, how he deals with the stubborn. Get to know Christ and his mind in the Gospels. Encounter him and place yourself in those stories. And you'll see that he's inviting you into those experiences in which he met others in the Gospel stories. Whether it be the leprous person, or the sinner woman, or the tax collector, or those scared in a storm. The more you can encounter his heart in the scriptures, reflecting on him. Like sometimes when we read the scriptures, we read the Gospels, you read it, you look up a commentary, oh, that's what that means. And you underline, and you write like a church father saying, and you put a little smiley face in your Bible. That's lovely. But like, I was taught to read the scriptures on your knees, to read the Gospels on your knees. That as I'm reading these stories and these passages, I'm putting them back to him in prayer, and I'm saying, Lord, I need this. Where am I here? Where are you in this story? Who are you trying to reveal yourself to me as in this gospel passage? You want to introduce yourself to me as a teacher, as a physician, as a father, as a judge. In those moments, you'll begin to understand his character, and when you understand his character, you'll see that character moving throughout your life. You say, oh yeah, he is the physician. He's trying to heal my soul in this tragedy or in this trial that I'm going through. And so I'm encountering him even in my trial. And this is where the apostles were able to rejoice when they suffered. They said we were counted worthy to suffer for your name's sake, when they were being beaten and tortured. Why? Because they were able to see Christ in that movement. They saw his movements in that. So they encountered him, and they said, now we are living what you lived. So first in scripture. Number two, I believe we have to learn how to pray for every little thing. And some people say, well, okay, I do pray for every little thing. Then you don't pray for God as the one that does big things, the one that parts the Red Sea, the one that moves mountains. That sometimes when we encounter Christ, we are asking him to do the things that, okay, you could probably do this miracle, but you can't do that miracle. You can't heal this person. You can't move this mountain. You can't really turn this whole problem upside down. Recently, I was dealing with a marital problem. And I was giving a sermon a few weeks ago about Lazarus and how he was dead for 4 days. And like the fourth day to the Jew was like, that's it. He's dead. He's dead. There's no more than 4 days. I was serving a couple where they were like in the 5th or 6th day of death, right? This was like, there is no chance. It would take Christ himself choking each one of the people to say, wake up for any of the... And I remember saying, but Lord, I'm going to come to you and say, you could do it. My mind says, this is a dead deal. Some people, it just doesn't work out. They get a divorce. They're beyond saving because they don't want to surrender their hearts to God. And God came in like literally 24 hours and raised the dead. Raised the dead. And I'm like, I don't get it. 24 hours ago, if you were to give me 10,000 solutions to fix this couple, there was no chance. And in 24 hours, he was able to stir some things up. 24 hours. You're like, wow. So that when we encounter Christ, we believe that he's the God that raises the dead on the 4th day, on the 5th day, on the 6th day. He's the one that moves huge mountains, and nothing is too hard for him. So when I approach him with that faith. And when I approach him with that faith, and I know that he can do those things, and I know that he desires to do many good things. He even says, and you will do greater works than these, about us. Christ says that we ourselves will experience greater works than he was performing while he was on earth. Then wait a second, like I can't miss out on those. I have to interact with Christ in that simple way, in that faith that says you can do it and you will do it, and I'm not carrying this problem. You carry it. He says, really? Okay. And he shows you.
How do we get that faith from like knowledge of that faith being a thing to really living that faith, to really having that faith? How do we obtain that level of faith?
Faith, I believe, is a muscle that has to be exercised every day. You just practice. Somebody comes to you with news. Okay, we have this problem. You say, okay, all right, Lord, I'm going to put this before you. And I sit down and I pray. You know, if you ever watch the saint movies, I always tell people to watch the saint movies. They're in Arabic, and the subtitles are sometimes like terrible translations, and the production is very old, and those movies built my faith. You're like, but those are like so cheesy, and when you look at how the saints would pray in the movies, you're like, well, that's the movies. Those are like, they created this like, this theatrical kind of experience so that you would kind of understand. When I was young, I would copy them. I would literally pray like them, and I would look to Jesus the way they look to Jesus, and I would call him the names that they would call him. And in that simplicity of, like I said, of being a child, I wish I was simple like that when I was younger. But even in following the lives of the saints, they will train us. They will train us. I'll tell you a beautiful story. Pope Carolus, when he was Father Mina the Solitary living in the windmill. You never think of Pope Carolus in these types of stories, but he one day was thinking, I really want gibna bayda. I want white cheese. He's like, I just miss gibna bayda. I'm here. When is the next time I'm going to have any? And he said, Ana nifsi. I wish I had some. Within like the end of the evening or the next day, some lady brought him a jar to the windmill and said, Ya Abuna Mina, this is for you. And he said, what is this? She's like, gibna bayda. And he took it and he looked up to heaven. And he said, Lord, you are aware of the small desires of a little monk in the middle of nowhere who's asking for something so simple, and you even care about that. That story has so much to learn from, because in that, again, it all goes back to simplicity and saying, Lord, this is what I want. You are all I have. You're all I have. I want gibna bayda. Yani, this is, you don't want anything else. You're fighting against demons and all the thieves in the middle of the night, and you want gibna bayda. That's your prayer. God said, okay, I'll even give you gibna bayda. That to me is the most powerful story ever, because I believe that God will send me these little things that I desire, that I need, or that I want, or that he cares. Even like Elijah, when Elijah was sleeping and he woke him up and gave him cakes when he was in the middle of his sleep. Beautiful stories to know that God cares about every detail of our life. So put those details at his feet.
I'll ask you for one last, your favorite modern saint story, and then we'll wrap this up.
I love all the saints. I'll tell you a funny story of Abuna Fanus. Abuna Fanus al-Mbabula, he's a modern day saint. He passed away, I believe, in 2016. He was probably, I think he was the head of the Anchorites at one point. Very, 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 very simple and very, 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 very holy. One time, these people were in the monastery, and their baby was like constipated for too long of a time that they were worried about this baby like dying, and they didn't know what to do. And you know, they're feeding the baby milk. The baby has to eat milk, but the baby is constipated, so it's getting it's not passing any of the food. And so they brought the baby to Abu Fanus. Abu Fanus says, give me your baby bottle. And grabs the baby. The baby is very sick and high fever and very, very sick. And he grabs a cup of sugar and puts it in the bottle and puts a little bit of milk. And the cup and the bag of sugar was filled with ants. So he put all the sugar with ants in this baby bottle, and like, it wasn't breast milk. He just put regular milk in it. Of course, newborn babies, they don't drink normal milk. They drink breast milk. And he shakes it up and says, give me the baby. He feeds the baby. The parents are freaking out because they think that Abu Fanus is about to kill their baby, right? That he's feeding basically the baby a bottle of sugar with ants in it. And he's like, he should be fine, and hands the baby back to the family. The baby was totally healed from this event. I know it's a funny story. I wouldn't say it's my favorite story, but I love that story in that there's no recipe to how God is going to do a miracle, right? When we approach Christ and we think that God is going to do it this way, or he's got some formula, God doesn't have a formula. It could be a cup of sugar for your newborn baby with ants in it and, vitamin D, milk. I mean, I thought it was just a very, very beautiful story.
Yeah, that's a great one. All right, well, thank you, Abu Paul, for coming out to the podcast. So it was a pleasure and a blessing. And thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications. See you guys next week. Thank you.